The way I kind of actually think about our impact is we think it's like almost a little bit like startup investing, where a couple of the people we helped turn out to go on and have these like really outsized impact, and that's where a lot of our impact comes from in the long term. You know, if you want to live a good ethical life, then actually the thing you should focus the most on is what you should do with your career, because your career is actually the biggest resource you have for affecting change in the world.
Well, so one really big thing that we probably should have mentioned right off the bat is where the name 80,000 hours comes from.
That's roughly how many hours you have in your working life.
Ben, welcome to the Super Data Science Show. I'm so excited to have you on. We haven't caught up personally in years, so we're going to be doing a bit of that on air, but I promise the audience is going to love it because you're fascinating. So first off, how you doing? Where in the world are you?
Great. Yeah, I'm coming to you from the 80,000 hours podcast basement, kind of windowless room where we record all of our podcasts with lots of nice sound padding.
Yeah, people should check out the YouTube version of this just to see. It's one of the nicest spaces that we've had, that any guest has had for recording it. So nicely done.
Well, it used to actually all be like boxes behind here, but I had to get them cleared away we put like a fake plant back there. Like temporary
it looks
plant.
Good. Oh yeah, I guess in the windowless room, fake plants are the only thing that would do.
Well, sorry, no, it's actually a real plant, but it's not normally there. Because like you say, it would die pretty fast, I think.
The plant has been planted there. Great. So we've known each other for a long time, more than 10 years. So I finished up at Oxford in 2012, and it was near my final years there. So maybe around 2010, you and I met because we were both in this investment challenge. So a big investment manager in London called Orbis, it was this competitive process where they invited applicants, and I don't remember if we had interviews, but they selected a group of 10 people. And then it was a really cool program. It was actually one of the most interesting parts of my entire PhD. And totally, it was unrelated to the PhD, but working with these 10 bright people from Oxford, from all over the campus. And for 12 months, we managed a simulated portfolio. But based on how your simulated portfolio performed, you made real money with no downside.
It's tempting to put it all into like a very high risk thing, isn't it? And just
yeah, there was an upper limit on how much you could earn, but it was a really cool experience, and for me, it was a useful one for my career, because my immediate job after my PhD was working as a trader at a hedge fund. Different kind of thing. So Orbis was doing long only holding of stocks, whereas with a hedge fund, by its very nature, we were doing like sub-second type trading. And it was impactful for you too, right? I mean, I think you got a job offer from Orbis, right?
Yeah, I did some internships with them, and that might well have been what my career would have been if I hadn't gone to work at 80,000 hours instead.
Right. And yeah, so then following almost perfectly along with this narrative, 2 years after me doing trading for 2 years, I was like, I don't think this is for me. I don't think that earning money for its own sake is something that I can keep doing and that I'm motivated about. And at that time, I was looking for making some kind of impact in my life. And so I would go on Saturdays to the trading floor and I would watch videos on YouTube of Doctors Without Borders. Because for a long time in my life, I'd had this idea of working as a doctor. And I'd kind of, after my PhD, medical sciences PhD, decided, no, I'm not going to do that. Been in school long enough. Let's do the hedge fund thing. And so my intention, I quit working at this hedge fund after 2 years. My intention was to move back to Canada from New York and finally study medicine. But in those few months, I had a call with you. So it was, I think, early days for 80,000 hours. You guys were starting to figure out your process. And so you offered very kindly to me to take an hour and help me reflect on my career and what I'd like to do and what my options are. And I remember because I was sitting in an apartment in the East Village that I only lived in for a few weeks because I last minute decided maybe I'll stay in New York a little bit longer and see what else is here instead of doing medicine. And I remember having the conversation in that apartment, and it was hugely beneficial for me. So, what I've been doing since, the decision to become a data scientist, to try that out, which I've now been doing for 7 years and absolutely love. So, thank you, Ben. That all came out of that. I mean, not all came out of that conversation, but it was a huge part of my process in that phase. We're going to talk in this episode about your 80,000 hours process, give people tons of career guidance, both generally as general structures, as well as specific advice for data scientists on how they can make the biggest possible impact in their careers. But anyway, so thank you very much. It's actually because of you that I became a data scientist, became host of the Super Data Science Show, and that anybody's listening to this today.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I didn't know all that. For my own curiosity, what specifically was it? Because we noticed that around that time, a lot of people who'd done science PhDs and wanted to do something else, they were starting to switch into data science, and that was quite a popular option that was emerging. And so I guess we were telling a lot of people about that at that time. Was that it, or was there something else?
Well, it's interesting. I remember you took notes in a Google Doc in front of my eyes while we did that session, and I still have that, I'm sure. So I could look it up. And also, you're a very fastidious person, so I'm sure you have that filed away somewhere neatly.
Sure, yeah, it'll be in Drive somewhere.
Yeah, so we could look up the exact things, but going from memory, one of the great draws of going into data science as opposed to, say, doing a medical degree was that I could start making an impact right away instead of studying for MCATs for a year, then doing a minimum 4-year degree, and then you've got all the residency stuff before you really start being able to be on your own. And so data science was this opportunity to get started right away, having an impact using a skill set that I already had. Having a PhD in the sciences, I had exactly the background that a lot of employers are looking for when they're looking for a data scientist. And so the summary point, I guess, that came out of that call with you was, why not try this? It seems like a good opportunity. You're already qualified for it, and spot on. I can't imagine. I'm being a doctor now. I'm so glad that I'm a data scientist. Yeah, it's really worked out. So thanks, man. And so tell us about 80,000 hours. So around that time, so that was around 2015 that we would have had that conversation. 2014, actually. So after you finished your degree at Oxford, how did you end up going down instead of on the investment manager path? Because I remember you were a talented investment manager. You were extremely thoughtful and well prepared for any discussion that we had around investments in that Orbis simulation group. And so you could have gone and presumably been a star investment manager. You certainly seemed like that. But instead, you decided to go down this path of helping people with their careers. So what happened?
I was just trying to think about, I think like you, I wanted to find a job that was like enjoyable and paid the bills, but also that made a kind of bigger contribution to the world or society. And in 2011, so I guess we would have graduated in the same year. Like I also left Oxford in 2012, and I met Will McCaskill at Oxford, and we were both wondering, what do we do next? He was a philosophy PhD student, and I was doing physics and philosophy undergrad. And we were just like, there's many things we might be able to do. Which one would actually have the most impact? And there's just like not really we couldn't really find any advice about actually even really trying to compare different paths we might go down. And we thought, you could work in investing, and through the donations you could make in that kind of career, you might be able to fund several people to work in a charity. So that, that seemed like that could be a high impact path. But, we also thought, like, if you look at history, researchers have often done had a lot of impact, people in governmental policy, working in charity as well as kind of an obvious option, and like how could we actually compare these different paths. So yeah, we just basically started thinking about it ourselves, and in 2011 we gave our first ever talk in Oxford, and that was like actually still our most successful ever talk. So like I think in the end maybe like 5 or 6 people totally changed their career paths from that talk. We've actually like 2 of those people now work at 80,000 hours like 10 years later. And yeah, some of them asked us. So I think a guy called Richard Batty also came up afterwards and was like, I think you should start an organization about this. And then we did, yeah. And then I started, that was a big decision for me. Like, should I do this nonprofit path or do the investing path? Or I was also wondering, should I do a PhD? I was kind of interested in like climate economics at that time. So those are the 3 things I was choosing between. But I like settled on this path. Yeah. And the idea being, if I can just help like one person switch into a higher impact career path, then that's like, twice this, I've like doubled my impact already. Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Super Data Science. Yes, our online membership platform for transitioning into data science, and the namesake of the podcast itself. In the Super Data Science platform, we recently launched our new 99-day data scientist study plan, a cheat sheet with week-by-week instructions to get you started as a data scientist in as few as 15 weeks. Each week, you complete tasks in 4 categories. The first is Super Data Science courses to become familiar with the technical foundations of data science. The second is hands-on projects to fill up your portfolio and showcase your knowledge in your job applications. The third is a career toolkit with actions to help you stand out in your job hunting. And the fourth is additional curated resources such as articles, books, and podcasts to expand your learning and stay up to date. To devise this curriculum, we sat down with some of the best data scientists as well as many of our most successful students and came up with the ideal 99-day data scientist study plan to teach you everything you need to succeed, so you can skip the planning and simply focus on learning. We believe the program can be completed in 99 days, and we challenge you to do it. Are you ready? Go to superdatascience.com/challenge, download the 99-day study plan, and use it with your Super Data Science subscription to get started as a data scientist in under 100 days. And now, let's get back to this amazing episode. So how many people, I've seen some of these stats come out. I don't know how it happened, if I saw you post about it on LinkedIn but you have some assessments. I mean, you must have to do this as a charity. And also I want to kind of get into you went through Y Combinator, which seems like, that's going to take us off on a big tangent. So before we start talking about Y Combinator and how charities can go through an accelerator like that, first tell me, how many people has 80,000 hours impacted roughly since you started it?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like readership, I think we've had over 8 million people visit the site at some point. But then, yeah, in terms of like the thing we really try to ultimately do is help people switch career paths. And over 1,000 people have told us that they've made a big career path change due to us. But yeah, I mean, we haven't caught everyone because I don't think you're in that survey. So
no, I think I am. Yeah. I think I do remember filling that survey in. Yeah, I think I got an email at some point years ago, and I think I would have waxed lyrically about what a wonderful experience was and what impact it had on me. But you're absolutely right. You couldn't possibly capture all of the people that you've impacted. But even just to know that 1,000 people have actively said, 1,000 is an absolutely enormous number. If you tried to like imagine 1,000 people packed into a room and all the different things that they were doing and are doing now, that's enormous.
Yeah. The way I kind of actually think about our impact is we think it's like almost a little bit like startup investing, where a couple of the people we helped turn out to go on and have these like really outsized impact, and that's where a lot of our impact comes from in the long term. So one example that's been on my mind recently is Sam Bankman-Fried, who was a mathematician at MIT. And yeah, he realized he was a really good fit for quantitative trading at a hedge fund, and he like found a job through people he met in our community. And, like he turned out to be a much better fit for that path than me. So I'm like really glad I did the nonprofit thing and he did that. But he later ended up founding now it's one of the biggest cryptocurrency exchanges, FTX. And according to Forbes, he has currently worth about $9 billion.
Wow.
Which he's planning to give like all away, basically. He was already one of Biden's largest donors in the last election. He's already given millions of dollars.
Wow.
He's like still
Earning
under 30.
to give.
Yeah, so that's the earning to give path. And I mean, yeah, he obviously donated a lot more than I ever could have.
And hopefully some donations to 80,000 hours.
Yeah, he did donate to us in the early days. Yeah, now we're funded already, so we haven't actually had any donations from him recently. But
all right, yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think this is really interesting for a number of reasons. So first of all, when you make that decision, okay, I'm not going to be an investment manager, I'm not going to pursue a PhD in climate economics, I'm going to start a charity. So if you want to do that, how do you think about funding in those early stages? And then tell us about the journey to eventually that leading to Y Combinator, and how people are probably, I guess you should introduce what Y Combinator is, but then also explain that they have this charitable aspect. And then, if I haven't asked too many questions already, the last one would be, how is it that, you can say, well, we're fully funded, we don't even need donations now. So I don't know, I'm interested in all those things.
Yeah, so in the early days, we were quite lucky because there was this community in Oxford called the Giving What We Can community, which is people who give 10% of their income to charities they think are most effective. And so we managed to get several donors from that community early on, and they kind of gave us our seed funding. And that was part of, definitely gave us the confidence to carry on, like seeing that early traction and getting that early funding. So I was able to go full time. Though, I mean, I think in the first year, our salaries were only £15,000. So, we did put it together on a shoestring, but
yeah, that is not a lot to live on. That converts to something like probably 25,000 US dollars. No, not even.
Yeah,
it'd be like
20,000. Yeah,
20,000 US dollars. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, though, I mean, I was an undergrad at the time, so I would have been living on about that much as a student. But
right.
Yeah, so I mean, we did eventually. We've raised those over time, but that was how we got started, and then. Yeah, I mean, I guess the other way we're in a very fortunate position is like this broader effective altruism community grew up that we're also part of. And that's a community of people who are trying to use reason and evidence to find the best ways of improving the world in general. Mm-hmm. And we found donors in that community who, kind of most donors, they're very like passion motivated. They just, they do something they find interesting and they'll support it for a while. And then, they might get interested in something else, and it's quite a fickle funding source. But our donors are much more like, if we show them we're changing careers and getting impact, they will keep giving us money, and they're kind of willing to scale us up in line with our impact. Wow. So it is actually like a scalable funding model, which is a very fortunate position to be in.
So then what about Y Combinator? So I guess I can give a little bit of context. So for listeners who aren't aware, Y Combinator is by far the most well-known startup accelerator around. So you can submit, anyone who's listening right now, if you have a startup idea, you can find the Y Combinator website and you can submit I don't know exactly how it works. You probably know, Ben, but like you submit like a pitch deck or something, answer some questions.
Yeah, it's an application form. Yeah.
No. And based on that, it's extremely competitive. But if you get into the program, you get some funding in exchange for, typically they take some equity. But the big thing about it is the network and the mentorship. Some of the best known venture capitalists in the world are heavily involved with Y Combinator. And so, in terms of getting that kind of mentorship, that kind of exposure, that opportunity to scale, I think it's one of the most potentially impactful things that you could get involved with as a startup founder. So I only know about through 80,000 hours that they also will fund some charities like yours.
Yeah, and so I think they started, I think it was in 2014. The first charity to ever go through was called WotC. And they, as far as I know, they still, every year, they have between kind of 1 and 4 charities or nonprofits that go into the program. and they just do that because they think this is a way for them to have some extra impact.
Cool. And then, yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, my last kind of question there around funding is, yeah, the last one was just like how, maybe you don't need to go into much detail, but just kind of interesting for me that you've reached this point where I guess 80,000 hours is kind of self-sufficient. Like, so you had this donor model for a long time, but now maybe through the experiences, learning how to scale through Y Combinator and maybe startup related strategies, you're now at this fully funded stage.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess there's a few things we could talk about with that, but like we definitely learned a lot from Y Combinator. It felt like it was almost this whole kind of toolkit or worldview for doing things in the world. And was like very inspiring. I think I was just seeing the other day, I can't quite remember the figure, but I think they've now created over $41 billion companies.
Wow.
And so just being in this room full of people who are all just like, we're going to set up $1 billion company and like they might actually succeed. It's just like very, I don't know. I mean, we were almost a bit jealous of how fast the for-profits can move.
Right.
And then, yeah, I mean, we learned a lot. I mean, yeah, one example was just like, we kind of figured, well, if you want to build an organization, then you should hire people, right? Because that's what organizations do. You hire a lot of people. But they're actually like very against hiring early on. And because the idea is like you really want to have your model down before you hire. So before you have product market fit, you should avoid hiring and just have the founders focus on that because they're the best people,
right.
best place people to figure out your model. And then later you try and like hire as quickly as possible. And that like really changed our strategy.
Well, so one really big thing that we probably should have mentioned right off the bat that I haven't yet is where the name 80,000 hours comes from. So
yeah, so that's roughly how many hours you have in your working life. So 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, and over 40 years, about 80,000. And so I guess go on.
Go ahead. I mean, it ties in directly to your mission, right?
Yeah, like one point is, if you would spend 6 minutes debating where to go for dinner for 2 hours, then the equivalent for your career would be spending 4,000 hours thinking about it and researching and exploring options.
Right.
And so it's just like this really big decision that's really worth thinking about. But even more than that, we actually think, if you want to live a good ethical life, then actually the thing you should focus the most on is what you should do with your career, because your career is actually the biggest resource you have for affecting change in the world. It's like, because it's so much of your time. It's like, it's more than all the time you'll spend with your friends and like eating dinner and like watching Netflix, like all that put together, especially like while you're an adult, you'll probably actually spend more time at work. And that means even if you can just increase the impact of your career a little bit, that could have, really big effects on improving things in the world.
Cool. Yeah, I love it. And I've always loved the name from the beginning too. So we're going to get into some specific data science advice. You and I were chatting before the show, and Ben, you prepared so much for the audience. I can't wait for you to share these data science specific tips for them on how they can specifically make an enormous impact with their 80,000 hours. But generally speaking, what is the kind of advice that you give to people? How does 80,000 hours shape people's careers?
Yeah, so one way of approaching it is at a very high level. We think what drives your impact is the problem you focus on, how pressing it is, how effective the solutions are you use to address that problem, how much leverage you get on those solutions, and then your personal fit. So how successful will you be in the career? Will you stick with it? Will you enjoy it? All those kinds of things. And so basically what we're trying to do is help people find better answers to all of those for questions. So find something that fits them better, has more leverage, more effective solution, or a more pressing problem.
Cool. Yeah, it's a sensible model. Makes a lot of sense. All right. That was kind of a redundant sentence there. It's a sensible model. It makes a lot of sense. All right.
No, that's good.
So let's talk about data scientists specifically. Let's cut to the chase. How can data scientists best have an impact in their careers?
Yeah, so maybe just I'd start by saying, data science is a really valuable skill. And so that's a big part of having a good career as well, is trying to actually build up what we call it career capital. So it's like skills, connections, credentials, reputation that you can then use to have an impact or to do something that you find satisfying as well.
That's actually something, that idea from our hour-long conversation, whatever, 7 years ago, that idea of building career capital, I use that constantly in thinking
awesome.
about my own career. Yeah, we haven't really talked since then, so you don't know that. But in my own mind, with what I choose to do each week, each year with my career, it is driven by that idea of building career capital. Being a host of the Super Data Science Show, it doesn't pay very much, but there's a lot of listeners and it's well produced and I really enjoy doing it. And so, the kind of the experience that I get out of this, and maybe indirectly some kind of network effects that come out of it, that's why it was from that kind of discussion, this idea of career capital, that when Kirill was going to stop being host of the Super Data Science Show and he asked me if I'd like to take over, I was able to say instantly, I didn't have to go away and think about it. It was like, yeah, of course. That is like, I don't know if anyone's ever given me a career capital opportunity like this.
Yeah. And like one way of seeing that is if you look at these studies about when people hit their peak productivity, it's actually like around 45 or even in the 60s in some careers. And that just shows that, you can actually keep increasing your skills for decades. And so this means that especially early career, one of the biggest priorities should be to get career capital.
Wow, I didn't know that, because I've seen studies, there's things out there, you probably know about these studies. So, when do Nobel Prize winning researchers make their big finding, or when do the Fields Prize winners in mathematics, when do they make their mathematical discovery? And I thought it was almost always in your mid-30s.
Well, so it depends on the subject. So basically once we hit our early 20s, unfortunately our intelligence starts going down pretty sharply. But like your connections and your knowledge and what's called like crystallized intelligence keeps going up. And so your sweet spot is when those two things intersect. And so it depends on the balance, how important the balance of those two things are in the career that you're focused on. So like mathematics and theoretical physics and also lyrical poetry, interestingly, like they peak fairly early, like often in the 20s.
Wow.
Whereas like on the other end, something like politics, you can't even become president unless you're 70 these days. So that's that's the peak right at the end. And that's because you need this reputation and you need connections, and they take a long time to build. And yeah, there is some evidence these ages are actually going older over time, which, could be because you just need more knowledge to get to the cutting edge of a field these days.
Right. I also think there's something that I think about as a societal thing. We're getting a little bit off track here. So we will get back to the data scientists making an impact in a second again. But something that I think about a lot is how, as a society, of course, longevity has increased enormously over the last 200 years. So 200 years ago, if you were born in France, your expected lifespan was 30, 32 years, something like that. And now it's mid 80s. And so not only are we living longer, so as a result of knowing more about nutrition, having access to food, medical treatments, but it occurs to me, isn't it also conceivable, I don't know if there's studies around this, but by being more aware of our nutrition, by exercising better, by getting more sleep, by not having stresses of just trying to get food on the table for the next meal, presumably, not only are we living longer, but maybe that thing about intelligence declining at 20, maybe that's, being extended out by all these social society level factors.
Yeah, I haven't seen research about that, but I would hope that people's kind of like healthy lifespan, is increasing as well. So I'd hope that kind of our peak functioning is also going later.
Just always trying to come up with reasons why I'm not getting dumber and crossing my fingers. But maybe I'm just so dumb that it's easy to think that. It's going to get easier and easier all the time. All right. So, okay. So data science, it's a valuable skill set. You're talking about career capital, and then I completely took over the conversation. So I'll let you keep going.
No, but I think that's an important concept to cover. And then, yeah, so we could kind of think about the 4 factors. Like you could think of data science is your route to getting leverage. So that factor is already somewhat covered. But then the thing I'd really encourage people to think about is which problems in the world are biggest and most neglected. And, we actually think that your choice of problem is the thing that most determines your impact. And like, that's not how people normally approach this. The kind of normal advice, if you're like, well, should I work on climate change or education or health or politics or whatever. The normal advice is like, you can't really compare these things. Just choose something that you're interested in that motivates you and just do that. That's the best we can do. But we actually think if you step back, actually, some issues are way bigger than others and some are way more neglected than others. And if you can find that sweet spot, then that's one of the biggest things you can do to increase your impact.
Wow. So in data science, what are these kinds of opportunities? So what are the problems in data science that can make an outsized impact, but maybe also are being neglected today?
So I might almost approach it from an even bigger picture perspective, which is just like,
okay.
In the world, what are the most pressing problems? And then how can I use data science to best contribute to them? And so you can kind of, there's like 2 philosophies of careers advice in a way. One is like, start from what the world needs and work backwards. And the other is like, start from what I have to offer and then kind of work forwards. Mm-hmm. And most careers advice is just focused on that like very person-focused approach where it's like, well, what are your interests? What are your skills, strengths, those kinds of things? And how can you use them? And that is a really important part of the equation. But we actually think it's kind of almost more important to think about what the world most needs and what contributions will be most valuable and then work back from those.
I guess with data scientists, especially, so if you're considering a career in data science, and especially if you already are a data scientist, you have a broadly useful skill set. So since we had that conversation years ago, I first worked in the ad tech area. And even as a trader, I was basically using data science skills. I didn't call it at that time, but I was a quantitative trader. I was using data science skills. So working in finance, working in advertising, and then now the last 7 years or whatever, it's been in human resources and operations. And so a data scientist has a skill set that is that can be applied to tackle any kinds of problems that generate data. And with the way that the world is going, with every 18 months as having twice as much data, we have more and more sensors collecting different kinds of data on more and more problems. And so a data scientist who's listening today, you already have this skill set that you can be applying to almost any industry you like. And so I think especially in this kind of circumstance, it makes sense to think about things in that backwards way from what society most needs if you want to have the biggest impact. So hit us, Ben. Where can we make the most impact?
That's a really good point. Yeah, so I have some more, like, I think there are some more specific things for data scientists that we could get onto. But then, just to like slightly expand on your point. Well, we have a job board on 80,000 hours, and we have a bunch of different problem areas, and there's jobs within each, and you can filter that by software engineering jobs, and actually some of them are actually data science jobs. So, like one example is there's this really interesting organization called ID Insight that basically does like data consulting for people working in development. So it helps them like evaluate, measure their programs, and they're hiring data scientists right now.
So by development, that's like global development. It's like
so fighting malaria and stuff like that. Nice. And actually, we have a whole episode about using data science in global development on our podcast. So that would be a thing to check out.
Cool. The 80,000 hours podcast.
Yeah, so that's if you search like 80,000 hours podcast data science Ophir Reich, then that's all about data science in development. And there's lots of examples. I think I was wondering if another person you might want to get on your podcast is the founder of Bayes Impact. I don't know if you've come across them, but they're actually another Y Combinator non-profit. They went through Y Combinator as well. And they were a data science consultancy for social services. So, they do things like help fire services optimize their algorithms so they can respond to fires faster.
Cool.
But then the biggest thing they're doing now is they created like a automated careers advice service for the French government. And I think they've had like 1 million users or something.
Wow.
So they do government consulting basically for data science.
Very cool.
So yeah,
and I love
and
their
then
name.
also, no. I mean, Bayes, that's like one of our big principles, is like thinking in a Bayesian way.
No kidding.
Yeah.
As a company at 80,000 hours, you think about the world in a Bayesian way.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think it's kind of one of the biggest problems of our time, because people, like you could kind of see this with the COVID pandemic where, when they were saying like, should we space out the vaccines? Loads of people were like, well, but we have no evidence that one vaccine shot will work. But like, no, we do have evidence. It's just, we don't have like a randomized control trial specifically about that. But like
Right.
the whole idea, the way I see Bayesianism is like any evidence is valuable. You just have to weight it by its strength. And you
Right.
you should start from your prior and you update, and then that's your best guess. And when you're
Yeah,
approaching these really uncertain problems, like what's the biggest issue in the world, that's like the approach you have to take. You can't have hard data that like definitely shows that's the answer.
Yeah, I think especially in circumstances like a pandemic where time is of the essence, and waiting for a randomized control trial on whether one shot has an impact, we can't wait around. We need the injections now. So that makes a lot of sense. And just for viewers who aren't familiar with Bayesian statistics, there are two main branches of statistics. There's frequentist statistics and Bayesian statistics. And throughout the 20th century, frequentist statistics was basically all that was taught to people in universities. And so if you studied stats in university, this is probably the one that you learned about, where you're supposed to have this completely objective reality based on data, where you have one group that gets the sugar pill, the other group that gets the drug, and you can compare how they respond. So you have these two distributions of data, and then you can statistically compare it. You can say, well, I have this confidence that these two distributions are different, that the treatment does have an impact relative to the sugar pill, to the placebo. Bayesian statistics is older than frequentist statistics, but it fell out of favor in the early 20th century because people didn't like how in Bayesian statistics you could, although it's optional, you can optionally add prior information into, so you can have your initial distributions of data be created by you based on some information that you have from another experiment, or just by reasoning, or even a guess. And then you can update that prior distribution based on real data that you collect, and that leaves you with the posterior distribution that you can then use to make a decision. And anyway, so Carl Pearson in the early 20th century, who's a huge figure in statistics, didn't like that idea of being able to have prior information. It wasn't quote unquote objective enough for him. But in reality, like you're pointing out, Ben, like the vaccines situation, there's all kinds of problems where we can't gather perfectly objective information anyway, or even if we can, our outcomes can be improved by using this outside prior information.
Yeah, totally. And it's like, that's a really good description of the kind of formal debate. But then I also think of Bayesianism, it's almost like a philosophy for making decisions. And one thing I'd really recommend on that is like Nate Silver's book has a whole chapter on how, like, if you look at people who are actually really good at making forecasts in the real world, like people who bet on sports, for instance, and they're actually being tested with real money on how good they are at predicting things. They basically take this very Bayesian style approach where they kind of start with a guess, they get a little bit of evidence, they slightly update their guess, and they kind of repeat and make lots of little updates over time. And that seems to be the best way of making actual decisions under uncertainty.
It's a fabulous book, The Signal and the Noise. If you haven't read it, listener, definitely do highly recommend that. Anyway, I keep taking you off track. So Bayes
Cool.
impact. So that sounds,
And that's like a good example of also like working with governments, which I think is, maybe sometimes less satisfying personally, but can be a really big route to impact. And then the third kind of broad path I would say is, like we've already mentioned, the earning to give path. So you could work in, you could join a startup or work in a company and then it's kind of amazing in a way. You could almost, even if you have a very, very narrow skill set and you're not sure how you could use that to work on a really pressing global issue, you can actually, through donating, you could kind of convert your labor into labor working on the most pressing problems and still have a really big contribution. And the reason why that's so high impact is with money, you can target it at like whichever organization in the world is like most filling the key bottleneck in a really pressing issue. You can get resources to that thing. So that's another route to, having leverage and having a big impact.
Cool.
But yeah, we can get into some more like specific things. So
yeah, I'd love to. So we've ended up kind of indirectly touching on data science ideas throughout the podcast, but I know you've prepared ways, really well researched, data driven points on how a data scientist can make a big impact. So come at us.
Yeah, I mean, so if I was speaking to someone who's really just willing to change to like anything to have a big impact, you're just super open. Then I think, and it's very, very relevant to data science. I think the thing I would think about the most is AI and what can be done there. And like one way to see that is, if you survey AI scientists about when will AI be able to do like many human jobs, like most human jobs, on average, like they say there's about a 50% chance in 45 years. So that's just that's a survey of a few hundred AI researchers.
That's a Nick Bostrom study. I'm probably mispronouncing his last name, and you know how to do it correctly, but there's...
he has a really cool book. The study of the survey of AI scientists is by Katja Grace and a couple of others. And yeah, we actually have a whole podcast episode just about that survey. So I'm sure there's lots of people listening who are like, that sounds bullshit in these ways. But yeah, we we have like 2 hours more just about that if you want to.
What's that episode called? Or how can we find that one?
So yeah, Katja Grace, I think if you search for like AI timelines or something like AI survey, you'd probably be able to find it.
It's probably more recent. There was, I quote this study from, it's almost a decade ago now, that Nick Bostrom did at an AI conference interviewing people, and when they thought we would have an artificial general intelligence that could learn the same kinds of tasks as a person. And it was the same kind of number. So I thought it was that one, but it sounds like Katja Grace.
Yeah, no. Yeah, so she tried to kind of do a more rigorous version of that kind of initial poll. But yeah, it's kind of, they do tend, it has come out in a similar figure. So yeah, 45 years time was like, that's the median estimate. But I mean, there's still like a 10 or 20% chance that it's in like 10 or 20 years. People are thinking maybe GDP3, maybe that kind of just like is how human reasoning works. And if we just scale that like 100-fold with a bunch more computing power, which we'll have soon, then maybe, you just basically unlock a ton of stuff. We're not sure. So yeah, I mean, the one way of like approaching that is like, it's almost like we're being told that like aliens are going to arrive on the Earth potentially in our lifetimes, like with a 20% chance. It would definitely be one of the biggest things to happen in all history if there was now agent like systems that were more intelligent than us. So I think trying to think about how can you make that transition go well could well be one of the most important things that people can work on at this point.
I see.
Yeah. And so if in that same survey of Katja Grace, they also asked the researchers, when this transition happens, how likely is it to be good versus bad? And most of them said it was going to be good, but 5% of them, they said there was a 5% chance that it could be extremely bad, such as human extinction. And I can't really think of another field where the actual people working in the field would say that there's a 5% chance that their field ends the world. But that's where we are.
Right.
So there's, at the same time, it's also still a very neglected problem. Like it's really grown a lot. There's now this whole field of research that's sometimes called AI alignment research, or the control problem. And another really good book about that is just called AI Alignment by Brian Christian, who's written a lot of actually really cool books about computer science. I was a big fan of Algorithms to Live By, which is all about like how to apply computer science to everyday decisions. That
last book there has come up is the book recommendation. So we always ask at the end of the show for book recommendation, and that Algorithms to Live By has probably come up. I've only been hosting the show since January, and it's come up a couple of times, including in the most recent episode number 495. So people love that book.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awesome book. It's like so well crafted. But yeah, he wrote a new book called AI Alignment, which is all about this topic of how can we make sure that AI systems do as we intend and are in line with human values as they get more and more powerful?
I was going to ask what alignment means there. I see alignment with like our values. Got it. And so I guess like AI ethics is something different entirely. I was initially thinking that this is kind of AI ethics, but AI ethics is something about like we need to make sure that our algorithms are treating different demographic groups fairly. It isn't about machines eating our brains.
Well,
They're
I
the
would
best
say,
energy source around. Oh no.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, we won't be. But yeah, no, I mean, AI. You could think of AI ethics as that's a very broad category that includes many important issues. And then I would say alignment is a subset of AI ethics. And the approach we're trying to ultimately take is like, what are the biggest issues, like maybe in history, that we might be able to help with and are being neglected? And I think it's these like longer term issues that are even more kind of important when we step back and take that really big picture perspective.
Nice. Cool. So AI alignment, that sounds huge.
Yeah. But there's a lot of like just practical jobs that you can go and take in this. So there's now teams doing research in AI alignment in like DeepMind, OpenAI, Anthropic, which was like a team who just recently left OpenAI, Google Brain, academic centers like Berkeley's, so Stuart Russell's group at Berkeley is doing this research. There's a nonprofit, Ort, MIRI. So MIRI is based in Berkeley and Ort's based in San Francisco. And yeah, all of these groups are hiring they're hiring ML engineers to help them run the models. So they all have these different research programs to try and improve AI alignment. And they're hiring lots of software engineers and data scientists. And so we actually, again, have a whole podcast episode all about, if you're a software engineer or a data scientist, how can you transition into these roles specifically? And we have like a whole guide to like a reading list, and yeah.
Amazing.
And it's possible to do it pretty quickly. Like, so one of the people who's interviewed, Daniel Ziegler, he just like every day he read a paper, and then like every week he tried to implement a model from one of the papers. And I think he did that for a few months, and then he like got a job at OpenAI.
Wow. Which podcast is that?
So yeah, if you search for like ML engineering, so it's with Catherine Olson and Daniel Ziegler. They were both, Catherine Olson was at Google Brain. And yeah, like super practical guide.
All right. So that's quite practical guidance. So you have a note here. I can see Ben's notes. He shared them with me in Google Drive, just like he did years ago when he was helping me with my career. And you have this in square brackets. I guess you weren't going to talk about it as chimps versus humans, but I love this because it shows the importance of AI alignment. Because I think if people are, you might think to yourself, why is AI a danger? We want it to be giving us self-driving cars and solving medical issues. Like, why would it be a problem? And this chimps versus humans thing, I think I first read about this in Wait But Why, Tim Urban's blog. So I think I know what it is, but I don't want to steal your show. So tell us about the chimps versus humans thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the idea that, chimps are actually like way stronger than us. Like if you get in a fight with a chimp, you've got no chance. But there's not that many of them on the world, and their fate just is in our hands. And that's because, we have much more intelligence. And if there was like kind of other systems that were more intelligent than us, then, we basically become the chimps. And like they're the humans then in this analogy.
Yeah. But it's actually, so like, relative to all of the other intelligent beings on our planet, chimps are like really close to us. Like their intellectual capacity is super close. So I think the way that Tim Urban in his Wait But Why blog post about it, I think the blog post is called something like the Artificial Intelligence Revolution. And I don't know if he got this from somebody else, but he draws a cartoon of a staircase. And it's this idea that's like this evolutionary staircase where, I don't know, you've got like insects really down at the bottom. But if you go to the human step, chimps are like one step behind. Very, very similar intelligence levels, highly complex creatures.
Yeah, I think there's even some evidence that it's just like a few mutations that caused the neocortex to fold a bunch more, and that gave you human brains. So it's it's not, in evolutionary terms, it's not a big step away.
not a big step at all. Whereas something like an artificial general intelligence, as soon as we engineer that, it could instantly, like maybe it'll take a month, or maybe it'll take an hour or a minute. It could engineer itself to be more intelligent than people. And then all of a sudden you have this artificial super intelligence, which we probably can't even describe in the same way that a chimp can't describe a symphony or poetry or a computer program. There's just no chance. You're never going to get a chimp to write a computer program, and you can't explain it at all. And so an artificial superintelligence could be in the same way, just having ideas, or I don't know if that's the right word for a machine, but it has cognitive capacities that we just can't even get anywhere close to imagining. But unlike your scenario of just a couple of genetic mutations and being next to each other on this intelligence staircase, the artificial superintelligence could be 10, 20, 30 steps above us, and just, we're just nothing to it. We're an insect.
Yeah. No, we don't know how far capacities could go. Yeah, one thing I'd just add is like there's probably some listeners thinking like, this is sounding a bit wacky. And I would say like this scenario you're kind of painting there is that's kind of quite associated with Nick Bostrom. And I think that is like that is one of the like key risks to bear in mind. But there's actually like many other scenarios where AI could be this really huge deal. And like if you kind of almost like the opposite end of the scale is this framing where it's more like, what we're doing today is we're kind of handing more and more control over to algorithms. Like more and more things in society are run by algorithms. And like that process could well continue. Well, it's almost definitely going to continue. Mm-hmm. And like that then relies on like, are those algorithms like definitely doing exactly what we want? Like, it seems like they often do things we don't want. Like they get us addicted to Twitter.
Right.
And like, as these algorithms get more and more powerful and better at doing things like getting us addicted to Twitter, even if there's just like a small difference between what we would ideally want and what these algorithms are doing, that could over time kind of gradually lead us further and further away from the world that we would want. And that's like a very gradualist view of the thing rather than this kind of fast takeoff style thing.
And Ben, you don't need to look to a dystopian future to imagine a scenario where the algorithms aren't doing what we want. We have that today in all kinds of very dramatic ways. In a lot of countries around the world, including where I happen to live right now, the United States, where I can't vote, but I live. And so I experience the incredibly divisive politics here, which if we still had newspapers that were providing two sides to a lot of the political issues, you'd have a lot of people who were educated on both sides of the issues and thought both were kind of had their pros and cons. But because of algorithms like the Facebook newsfeed and Google's news prioritization, and you have completely different camps of people who see the world in completely different ways and can't even imagine being in the other person's shoes. And then all of a sudden you have people rioting in your government buildings.
People who've maybe you might have heard about some of the kind of Nick Bostrom stuff before, and the more like kind of early on in AI safety, people were talking about those scenarios more. But a lot of the current AI alignment research, it's just focused on problems that we face right now, like, adversarial examples, like how do we make sure ML systems don't give us like entirely the wrong answer if you just make a like tiny tweak to them. But then like many of these then relate, these kind of short-term issues also relate to potentially like longer-term alignment issues as well. And so there's a kind of spectrum of work to be done, and we need some of all of it.
Super interesting. Well, I don't want to take too much more time on this point. I guess we could have an entire episode about it, but you already have it. So I'll refer listeners to that episode instead. Maybe you can mention the guests that were on it again so they can easily look it up. And we'll have it in the show notes.
Cool. Yeah, Catherine Olson and Daniel Ziegler.
Right. Nice. And so I have all kinds of questions like, what are the other skill sets that you need if you want to get into this field? But I think we'll just... maybe if you have like one or two of those, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So if somebody's already a data scientist or a machine learning engineer, software engineer, and they want to get into AI alignment, what are the key things that they need to learn to be getting into that field?
So so many of the roles are just basically ML engineering roles. So you just need that exact skill set, and then you can go. Okay. You could, and then you need to learn about the current research within AI alignment. And so, yeah, I think you should be able to find a reading list through our resources of like all the most important papers.
Cool. All right. So what else? How else can a data scientist make a big impact?
Well, yeah, if we set AI aside, then so in terms of the problems that we personally think are biggest and most neglected, a big cluster we focus on, we call it like global catastrophic risks. So it's like things that could be global in scope, and they often tend to be very neglected. And we put AI accidents and AI alignment and how to make AI go well as one of the top kind of things in that category. But then another, like a second most ranked one is preventing a pandemic even worse than COVID-19.
Right.
And so, yeah, we are encouraging people to go and work on pandemic prevention. We had our first guide to that in 2016. And I mean, I think now it's almost like it's actually maybe even more pressing because people know that this is an issue. And so there's a lot more resources available for these to work in this area. But there's like a real risk right now that a lot of the efforts go into preventing things that are kind of similar to COVID. Like that's normally what happens is people just, they fight the last battle. And like, previously all of the US's biosecurity efforts were focused on anthrax because, there happened to be that terrorist scare. So then all the budget is on anthrax, even though that's only like one of like many, many diseases that could be a threat to national security. Right. And so, now I'm really keen to make sure when we do all this work to do pandemic prevention, can we make sure that it's guarding against all the different varieties of pandemics we could face? And in particular, is guarding against one that could be much worse than COVID, because COVID nowhere near represents the worst case scenario for a pandemic. Like it would be perfectly possible for one that's...
Yeah, it's been horrible, but it's not, hospitals being overrun. It ended up in most regions actually being avoided through interventions. But there could very well be,
And we just know that there have been diseases that were very, very infectious, but had a fatality rate of 10 or even 50%, whereas COVID was only 1%. And it's not really clear that people would still be willing to like stock shelves in a supermarket if, it was like a 30% chance of dying if you caught it rather than a 1%.
Right. Oh my goodness. I didn't even think of that. Like all of the shortages that we have today in the service industry that has been precipitated by COVID, even though now, at least where I live in New York, most people are vaccinated, we still have these issues around staffing shortages in the hospitality industry. And wow, if the fatality rate was 10% to 30%, like why would you go outside?
Yeah.
Why would you stock a shelf at all? And we don't have robots that can do it yet.
Yeah. So we call those like global catastrophic biorisks.
We're laughing. I don't know. What else can you do? That's often that happens to be in arguments. Like somebody will be upset with me and I laugh and just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what else to do.
Well, okay. I mean, so we have a whole guide to what you can do about it. So
good point.
And I think, I mean, there's a lot of jobs for, there's a lot of jobs involving statistics and data science within the whole biomedical sciences area, and in particular within pandemic prevention is a kind of subfield I'd particularly encourage people to think about.
Nice, and I can see from your notes that I still have open in front of me that there's at least one more that you might like to talk about.
I mean, there's a lot of other interesting ones. I mean, we kind of mentioned this one already, but just on our job board, there's open data science jobs, and many of those.
The information security one.
Oh yeah,
That's a cool one.
So this one's like a little bit harder to explain, but we do have a short write-up on the website if you're interested, and if anyone is, then there might well be people listening who have a security background.
No doubt.
It seems. I mean, it's also just a thing to actually really consider working on, because it seems to be a skill set that's in really high demand right now.
Yeah, huge.
It seems like, with just 1 or 2 years of retraining in that, there's like pretty high salaries available for these positions. And then I also think If you're interested in issues like artificial intelligence and synthetic biology and so on, it is going to be important in the future that there's good information security around these kinds of technologies. That there's groups who are working on like bioengineering and like various types, and like that knowledge could be dangerous if it gets out. But like right now, information security is like very weak. Like basically any determined attacker can steal like most things. And so in a world where there's like very powerful technologies out there and there existing algorithms, that doesn't seem so stable. But yeah, I mean, there's also a kind of a more prosaic end of this thing where it's like, could there be big computer viruses that could pose systemic risks to society as well? And yeah, we're sorry to keep pitching our podcast, but we do have a whole podcast episode about that with
great. Obviously, our audience is into podcasts, and so if you can give them this information in a nice podcast format, I'm sure there's tons that are interested. You can mention as many episodes as you'd like.
Okay, yeah. So it's with Bree Schneider, who I think is like one of the kind of big people in information security, and it's like a whole episode all about, how that can be valuable for society and how to get started in that career.
Super cool. Well, all right. So we've covered data science specific areas where data scientists can have a particularly large impact. But data scientists, as well as any other listeners, could probably benefit from any general strategies, any general guidance that you have on how someone can strategize about their career. I had this incredible opportunity, 7 years ago, to get on a call with you for an hour, but you can't do that with everyone on the planet. So what can they do?
Well, so we do actually still have one-on-one advising on the website.
No way! Wow.
So you can, if you're a listener, you can apply to that. And so, yeah, we have about 600 slots this year. So yeah, there's an application process because it's free. But yeah, and it's particularly aimed at people who want to work on the problem areas that we're most excited about, just because we have this limited capacity. But if that's you, then I definitely encourage people to apply. And then yeah, with career strategy, well, we've already talked about one thing, which is like the importance of building career capital early. And then yeah, we've just been kind of talking about all these kind of potentially high impact options and like what are the world's biggest problems, and that can often feel a bit overwhelming. And so I would see those as like, those are things you can aim for, and it's like really useful to have some long-term aims to aim for. But then when it comes to kind of actual career strategy, it's really important as well to just think a lot about like, what am I going to do in the next 1 or 2 years? Like try and make it really, really concrete. And when you're like doing that, you can be thinking like, how can I test out a particular long-term option? How can I get some valuable skills? And then, after you've done that for a while, you can reassess. And like, good careers are much more this iterative thing where you do something for a few years, you get some career capital, you learn some information about what's going to be best for you, and then you try again, and you kind of like gradually improve over time with some kind of longer term vision in mind. But that can easily change, and you learn more about it as you go.
Cool. That is a really great strategy. And it's really reassuring to know that we don't peak in our 30s unless we're looking to win the Fields Medal for mathematics. I guess my time it's slowly creeping away on me each day. But that by building career capital early and then following this kind of strategy of having a long-term goal, but iterating in these kind of 1 to 3 year chunks, almost no matter what our age is, it sounds like our peak productivity can be really later in life. And so that's really nice to know. So there's one thing that we didn't talk about discussing on this program, but is something 80,000 hours related that I read years ago and that was hugely beneficial to me. And so if you remember about this, I'd be interested in you sharing it with listeners, which is, what are the top skills that people should learn, period? So I remember seeing this. It's this really well-researched 80,000 hours article, and number one was like learning how to learn or something.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly. So actually, yeah, we actually did that research with it was with a data science bootcamp. So it was someone who was doing an internship at one of these data science bootcamps, and he did the analysis for us. And
Cool.
what he did is he took the US has this big data set. I think it's the ONET data set. So it has like,
Yeah.
I think like, 700 jobs, and it has like what skills they need and the salaries and like a bunch of data about them. And we kind of like looked at the jobs that were highest paid, and like looked at what skills were most needed in them. And I think we also looked at the jobs that people found most satisfying and looked at what skills were most needed in them. And we also looked at what skills were most transferable. So which ones would show up in the largest number of jobs. And then we used this to make an index of which skills seemed most valuable. And I think if I remember correctly, the top one was actually judgment, which is like, maybe not that helpful, but I mean, it is interesting. And like one thing that did stick out in that analysis, yeah. So we also tried to look at like the skills that seem most valuable are actually often soft skills, or more problem solving, learning how to learn, judgment, productivity, these kind of general skills. And actually, some of the more technical skills, like kind of STEM skill sets, were a bit lower, which might not be the best thing to say on a data science podcast. But I think one thing is that the STEM skills are probably they're easier to improve, so they could still be very cost-effective skills to learn, even if they're not the most valuable all considered. And then another thing that analysis showed is that actually it seems like there's evidence that the sweet spot these days, like this, the ones where there's the most growth, is places where you have both technical and soft skills. And so it's that overlap which I think makes a lot of sense if you think about the future of automation, because a lot of basic kind of data analysis is basically being automated because, we just have R now, and, stuff that would have like taken a lot longer in the past, we can just, it's much easier, and that's going to continue. So the role of people doing data analysis becomes much more about figuring out like, well, what actually is the problem in the first place? Like what analysis would even be helpful? And then it's like explaining that analysis to people and figuring out how to apply it to real business problems. And so, yeah, if you can combine those both hard skills and soft skills, it seems like a good spot at this point.
Cool. Great takeaways, Ben. So I'm sure, we literally could have this podcast go on for hours. And so I would like to definitely have you on again sometime, and we can talk about maybe things like have an AI alignment specific episode or something like that. But for now, we're going to start wrapping up. So what is the gamut of ways that people can get involved with 80,000 hours?
Yeah, so we've mentioned a bunch of them. So we mentioned the job board already. We mentioned the one-on-one advice. And then another one I would add is we have a bunch of online guides on the site. And the first one is called the Key Ideas Guide, which is more about like the big concepts. How do you actually compare careers in terms of impact? And then we have a list of problems that we think are unusually big and neglected, covering some of the ones we've talked about, but actually we have this whole long other list of like 20 other problems that we didn't touch on today. And then like career paths that seem high impact. And then actually maybe more importantly, we also have now this career planning course. So it's like an 8-week course, and each week there's like an article to read, and then it gives you some questions to answer about your career. And at the end, and there's like an attached worksheet, and at the end you have a whole complete career plan. So that's designed to kind of help you take all these like giant considerations and actually figure out an individual plan based on them.
Awesome. And obviously all the podcast episodes too.
Yeah, no, the podcast, podcast is good to check out. And yeah, like maybe I know everything we provide is free as well, because we're all funded by donations.
Yeah, I have personally benefited a fair bit from resources that you provide. So thanks so much to you and everyone at 80,000 Hours for the work that you do, the impact that you've made on me personally, and surely to many listeners today, and the thousands of other people out there. It's really awesome, Ben. So I'm glad that you made that decision back in 2012 to go down this path. So we've talked about quite a few books actually in this episode already. Nate Silver's Signal in the Noise. We had the AI alignment book. There's others that I'm just aren't immediately coming to mind. But do you have a particular book recommendation on top of all those?
Yeah, one I'd really recommend, which came out last year, is called The Precipice. It's by Toby Ord, who is one of our trustees. And it is, well, so his idea is that like the next century or so, it seems like we've entered this new age in humanity, which he calls the precipice. And like one way of seeing it is like technology has developed to the point where we can actually end civilization. Like we have nuclear weapons, we have runaway climate change, we have pandemics. And so at the same time, though, we like haven't really developed the wisdom to like make sure we don't do that.
Right.
So it seems like we're in this unusually risky time in history. And, you know, this means that for people listening, you know, maybe you can help with these challenges that are literally of historical importance. Because if we navigate this time successfully, then like we don't know how long things could last, but like way, way longer. There could be far more people in the future than alive today. But we could also mess it all up. And, you know, there's been hundreds of thousands of generations before us, and we're the ones who like dropped the baton. So that really is a big thing motivating our work. And then one thing I also really like about that is this final book, the final chapter is called Our Potential. And that's just one thing I wanted to make sure I also mentioned, that it's like, yeah, we've talked a bunch about like these kind of risks and things that could go wrong. But another thing that really does motivate me is just like, how much better could the future be? And yeah, and I think it is like kind of like you were saying with the chimps versus human stuff earlier. It's not even clear that we can kind of like really imagine how like good life could get. And
Right.
so I think I see it as like this kind of, there's these two extremes, that all these technologies could both make things like way better than we know today, but they also pose these big risks. And the job of our generation to try and tilt it more in the good direction rather than the bad one.
Yeah, and there's countless examples that are data driven on how the world has improved over the last couple of centuries, but how things are still awful and they could get way better. And you made a LinkedIn post recently at the time of recording about that. And I clicked through and I read a whole bunch and I made a whole podcast episode about it. So episode 492, it's called "The World Is Awful and It's Never Been Better." And I cite you and I cite
Awesome.
Max Roser or
Max Roser,
Rosen.
yeah, who's awesome, yeah.
So founder of ourworldindata.org. And
they're probably hiring data scientists too, so I probably should have mentioned them earlier.
There you go. A really cool company. I've been using charts from ourworldindata.org in my deep learning course for years. So I kind of do in the same way that we're kind of rounding out this podcast episode, and in the same way that you're talking about that book chapter in The Precipice. When I do my 30-hour deep learning course, the final lecture, like kind of the final half hour, I bring out a whole bunch of charts from ourworldindata.org. I didn't know the connection to you at the time that I was doing this. I've been doing it for years. And I show across the board in terms of literacy, child mortality, which is the big one that I focus on in episode 492, in terms of longevity, in terms of democracy, death in conflict, domestic violence, across so many measures. The world was unimaginably awful only just a few generations ago. And so while there still are awful things going on today, it's not evenly distributed. So there's a lot of, you and I, Ben and me, we happen to live in, in terms of the planet today, we're very fortunate where we live, but it's not evenly distributed even today. So there's that huge opportunity of just kind of leveling the playing field more. And then beyond that, like you're saying, like you're alluding to, it's crazy given the progress that we've made over the last 2 centuries. As long as we don't drop the baton, like you say, things could be unimaginably good for us in our lifetime and certainly for the generations after us. So very cool. Well,
cool.
I just
Seems
have
like
one
a
last
good note
question.
to end on.
Yeah, I mean, I should probably be letting you make a big final point. So if you have any other ones that come up in the next few seconds, I have one last question for you, which is just simply, how should people follow you? Obviously, you have a huge amount of insight. I personally gain from following you on social media and the posts you make. So how can others do the same?
Yeah, so I've been posting kind of in progress research ideas on Twitter recently. That's probably the best thing. But yeah, I also have LinkedIn. I've been posting on LinkedIn as well. And benjamintodd.org has a kind of everything else, some of my past writing.
Nice. Well, we will, as always, include those social media links and your website link in the show notes. Ben, I think it goes without saying that this has been an awesome episode. I've really enjoyed having you on. And yeah, hope to have you on again sometime soon.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much.
Well, I'm sure I don't need to say it explicitly, but I have a huge amount of respect for Ben and the work that he does at 80,000 hours. And my goodness, is he ever able to effectively communicate to us how we can adjust our career path in an ever more personally meaningful and globally impactful direction. In today's episode, Ben covered the relative value of building career capital as opposed to financial capital, especially if we're early in our career. He talked about how identifying career avenues that are impactful as well as neglected is a solid general strategy for success. He covered how particularly neglected but hugely impactful application areas for a data science skill set are areas such as AI alignment, pandemic prevention, and information security. He covered the effective career strategy of iterating in 1 to 3 year chunks toward a long-term goal. And we talked about how job description data suggests that the most valuable career skills are soft ones like judgment, productivity, and learning how to learn, but that the most career growth potential lies where technical and soft skills intersect. As always, you can get all the show notes, including the transcript for this episode, the video recording, any materials mentioned on the show, and the URLs for Ben's social media profiles, as well as my own social media profiles at superdatascience.com/497. That's superdatascience.com/497. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd of course greatly appreciate it if you left a review on your favorite podcasting app or on the Super Data Science YouTube channel where we have a video version of this episode. To let me know your thoughts on the episode directly, please do feel welcome to add me on LinkedIn or Twitter and then tag me in a post to let me know your thoughts on this episode. Your feedback is invaluable for figuring out what topics we should cover next. All right, thank you to Ivana, Jaime, Mario, and JP on the Super Data Science team for managing and producing an extra special episode for us today. Keep on rocking it out there, folks, and I'm looking forward to enjoying another round of the Super Data Science podcast with you very soon.